Hello, everyone. What's going on? This is the Noah Gillian Show, and I, of course, am your host, Noah Gillian. So happy you decided to join in today. It is the 2nd of August, 2023, and on today's episode, we're going to be recapping and breaking down the Major League Baseball trade deadline that came and went on the 1st. Joining us on the show today is longtime contributor Connor Laverty. What's going on, man?
Not too much, not too much. Happy to be back on. Feel like it's been a little bit. And yeah, the season's heating up, ready to talk a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like the sports calendar in general starting to pick back up a little bit after that summer lull. So we're definitely going to be getting on here more often. But before we get into the show, definitely hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. 5-star on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything would really help the podcast grow, help us support. Also on Twitter or X now, also on Instagram and X, you can find me and Connor's handles in the description below. So check that out. And without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So, Con, there was a ton of big names moved and a lot of smaller deals to bolster contenders at the deadline this year. It was an extreme sellers market in a sense that there were a lot more buyers than teams who were clearly out of the playoffs. As with many in the supply and demand, the limited amount of supply and of movable players at the deadline naturally led to that increased demand, which led to that increased prices. Dave Dombrowski talked about this a little bit about how he just didn't really feel like there was a lot of moves that could be made that made sense, like what they had to give up. And it kind of led to what I feel like a lot of people may have seemed as like a quiet deadline in terms of a number of deals and all that stuff. But that does not mean that the GMs rested on their laurels. So starting off, let's just talk about the hometown Phils. Um, there was a lot of talk about what they needed, what they might do. It was kind of the consensus among the industry that they weren't going to go out and make a blockbuster deal, although they were kind of linked with outside names like Goldschmidt was one name ESPN kind of floated for a hot second, but never really got much traction there. So the two moves they did end up making, they acquired starting pitcher Michael Lorenzen, all-star starting pitcher Michael Lorenzen from Detroit for Hao-Yu Lee, the number 5 Phillies prospect in their system. And then they also acquired infielder Rodolfo Castro from Pittsburgh for starting pitcher Bailey Falter. So just in the lens of those two deals, Connor, I feel like a lot of people thought um, a right-handed hitting outfielder was in the cards for the Phils. I think they were linked with some pitchers as well. So I guess in general, what did you think of Dombrowski's kind of deadline, and what do you think his strategy was this year?
Yeah, I think the expectation was definitely that we were going to go out and get a bat so that Schwarber could DH a little bit more. We get another righty in the lineup, which has been struggling, the lineup itself. So I was definitely a little surprised to see the bigger move as a pitcher in Lorenzen. Who knows? Maybe Rob shocks us and throws him out in left field. I think he's got 20 career home runs. I saw a video on Twitter yesterday of him hitting one against the Phils. So
Yep.
Lorenzen's an athlete. We could maybe stick him elsewhere. But all joking aside, he's had a great year. Like you said, he was an all-star for the Tigers. He's 3.58 ERA on the season as a starter. Really good fastball spin rate, great walk rate as well. Doesn't walk too many guys. He's just a solid pitcher, and he's having a good year. So, Hao-Yu Lee, like you said, number 5 prospect. I like him. I think he is going to be a pretty good player. Thing is, we've got Bryson Stott and Trey Turner up the middle for however long. So I'm fine with that move from Dombrowski. Yeah, overall, I think it's a good move. It appears, I believe that he's going to step in as like a 6th starter. And we're going to have to make a bullpen move. I know Josh Harrison was optioned already to make room for Castro in the on the bench hitting wise, but we're going to have to move someone from the bullpen too for Lorenzen. So, yeah, I like the deal overall. Moving to Castro, don't know a ton about him. He's young, switch hitter, versatile in the field. He's going to replace Harrison in that role, kind of, it looks like. I'm fine with it. Bailey Falter doesn't do anything for me, so I'm fine with getting a young switch hitting bat. We'll see what he can do.
Yeah, I think what a lot of things that I've seen about Castro specifically was that he mashes left-handed pitching. So maybe he can kind of be used in that, Josh Harrison, obviously with Bryson Stott at second base, Harrison often would hit for him when there was a lefty on the mound, which say what you will about the move. Obviously, a lot of fans don't love taking Bryson out of the lineup, but getting him some days off here and there. If Castro can, do well against lefties here or there, he's not a free agent until 2029, I believe. So it's another controllable. I saw some people kind of comp this to the Edmundo Sosa deal we made last year. Controllable infielder. It's got some good metrics, but generally not someone who's going to come in and start, just be more of a depth option and kind of go from there. In terms of Lorenzen, this was where a lot of smoke was coming from. A lot of people matched us to Lorenzen. Honestly, I really like it. You mentioned the expanded rotation. It seems like they're going to go to a 6-man rotation. So I like that, especially for Wheeler and Nola. I think you could see in the World Series last year and the Championship Series last year, Nola definitely seemed to kind of wear down. Wheeler, obviously, in Game 6 or whatever it was of the World Series, Topper decided to take him out, maybe a tiny bit earlier, but they kind of sensed that he was kind of wearing down a little bit. So keeping those guys fresh going into the playoffs, I think, is the number one priority there. And then a guy in Lorenzen, I mean, you talked about a little bit. I mean, this is a guy who's been pitching since 2015. So he's been in the league for a long, long time. His ERA hasn't always been fantastic, but his expected ERA has always been in the mid to high threes. This year it's in the low fours. So he's pitching a little bit above his head this year, but generally it's pitch, he's pitching a little bit better than I feel like the consensus has been. Kind of been for him. So I'm really kind of excited to get him in. He's also been a reliever at points during his career, so can kind of go to the pen in the playoffs when we're kind of probably going to bring it down to a 4-man rotation. If we make the playoffs, if and when we expand, past that initial round of the playoffs, that 3-game series, you could see him coming out of the pen. But overall, like you said, I like the move. I think it gets it done. You hit the nail on the head with how you Lee. Probably the best bat to ball skills. A lot of people were saying in our organization, but kind of he wasn't really cracking the top echelon of our prospect ranking. Was kind of always that mid back end top 10. And another little wrinkle here is Johan Rojas. A lot of people, or Dave Dombrowski specifically, said that they really, really like him and they could see has star potential. They really wanted to give him this runway to show what he can do. They got calls on him and they really didn't entertain any. Same thing with Mick Abel and Griff McGarry. They weren't really entertaining those options. So it seems like Dave Dombrowski's kind of sending a message, Connor, to this team that, like, listen, we got the pieces and we just got to play better. Dombrowski, typically a guy who blows up farm systems and, goes for the win, but kind of saying the players need to play better with these moves, right?
Yeah, and that was a point I was going to make after you finished was I'm kind of happy and / proud of Dave Dombrowski because you mentioned how much of a seller's market it was, right? So like he's not paying that. He
Right.
saw what the prices were for these guys. Like, I mean, Aaron Savale having a great year, who we'll probably talk about, goes for Kyle
Yep.
Manzardo, who's a top 15-ish prospect. Like that's a steep price. I know Savale's good. He's going to help you right now, but like that's a lot. And then we're going to get into the Mets, I'm sure. And
Yep.
they're getting good prospects back for 40-year-old pitchers who obviously two of the greatest pitchers of all time, but I don't know. I mean, they're paying those guys now $40 million. You're getting them for 1 year and you're giving up your top prospects. And I respect that Dave wasn't going to pay those kind of prices to get an elite guy right there. I think it was the right move.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. Especially with not getting a bat too in the lineup. It seems like Marsh is probably going to be the everyday left fielder now, and Rojas is probably going to play every day in center. And I love that for outfield defense specifically because Marsh is great out there and Rojas may be even better. So just seeing them, hopefully Bryce can play almost every day at first now. He's been great there, and just get Schwarber out of the field at all costs.
And if you saw
Um,
Nick make that relay last night when the ball got stuck under the fence, Nick's doing a lot better out
Yeah,
there.
he's been like actually really, really good in right field this year. I don't know what the metrics say, but just the eye test watching him play, it's been a lot better. I
Yep.
think that's something he mentioned last year in the postseason run, and especially in the offseason, improving that. So it'll be good. Honestly, I'm really excited. As of right now, the Phils occupy, I believe they're tied with the Giants for the top wild card spot, or they might be half a game behind the
Yeah, I think we're
Giants.
half a game back. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Giants ended up winning last night
Yep.
before all the scores finalized. So they're half game ahead. So honestly, with the Braves playing how they're playing, it's not realistic to really catch them. So holding on to this wild card spot, getting into a 3-game series for your season is what it appears to be. And I'll take Wheeler, Nola, and ideally we don't have to use Ranger or Taiwan, but I'll take those guys against anybody. But since we started in the NL East with the Phils, we may as well keep it there with the team that pretty much defined the 2023 trade deadline. The New York Mets they were seen by
Uh,
many in the preseason as a team destined for the playoffs and potentially even the World Series. But those dreams have crashed and burned to a sub 500 record, and it became clear that they would sell, and sell they did. So let's talk about first con. Obviously, coming into last year, they signed Max Scherzer to a big deal, high average annual value, only a 3-year deal, but a lot of money per year, $40+ million per year. And then this offseason, they go out and they sign Justin Verlander, also in his late 30s, maybe even pushing 40, to another deal worth $40 million a year, another shorter term deal in terms of years, but a lot of money per year. Both of those guys are no longer in Queens. So the official details here, Scherzer ended up getting traded to the Texas Rangers for infielder Luis Angel Acuna, who was the Rangers' #1 prospect. So pretty big get there. And
was
then
he their number one? I don't think he was their number one.
he was up there regardless.
Yeah, he was
One
up
of
there.
their top
He was up there.
prospects.
Yep.
And then Justin Verlander gets traded back to the Houston Astros, where he won the Cy Young last season, for outfielders Drew Gilbert and outfielder Ryan Clifford. Those guys were the #1 and #4, I believe, Houston prospects respectively, give or take a couple spots. So we'll see where they actually have the Mets top prospects here, so I can pull that up just to see where they rank
Yeah.
in their
All
new
three of those
prospect.
guys are probably right up there for the
Yeah,
Mets.
Luis Angel Acuna #2 now, Drew Gilbert #4, and Ryan Clifford #6. So and obviously, it's going to be fun to make fun of the Mets for these deals. Obviously, they came in with a lot of talk. They won 100 games last year. They bring in Justin Verlander. There's a lot of talk about the Mets, and they've crashed and burned this year. But kind of looking at the return they got back for these guys, it's pretty impressive, honestly. They're eating a lot of money of the Verlander and Scherzer deals, which is part of the reason why they were able to get such good contracts. And it's kind of an interesting loophole that Steve Cohen's kind of doing here, because if they just ship these guys to these teams, they're not getting Acuna, they're not getting Gilbert and Clifford in those deals. So in eating so much money and almost buying a higher level prospect, it's kind of an interesting strategy that the Mets took, and to almost hopefully accelerate a rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it. But what do you make of, I guess, just the two aces getting shipped out of town, and what they got back for those guys?
I mean, I just love to say it. You talk about a team who breaks the payroll record for a single season, and on July 31st, they're selling. Like, I love it.
It's
I love
awesome to see.
it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you just love to see it. You can check the record. I was never in on the Mets back on the. I wasn't in last year. I wasn't in the year before. I never will be. Um, they did get a good return. Like you said, I like all three of those prospects. I roster a couple of them, and I'm upset that they're now in New York instead of in Houston. But hopefully they can still excel there. Yeah. The Mets just really struggled. I mean, them and the Padres were really disappointing this season.
Yeah.
And the Padres are kind of hanging around that wild card still, but it just doesn't seem like they're gonna they need a real big push. Like
Yeah,
I think they're
as of
5 out.
now, San Diego's 5 games back of the wild card.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Mets are 7 games back, so both under 500. But I thought it was interesting. I just had a thought, but it's kind of going out of my head there. But regardless, they totally sold, and they sold Tommy Pham, they sold Mark Canha, they also sold David Robinson, their closer. And so what I was going to get to now, it's coming back to me. Max Scherzer. I don't know if you saw the article Ken Rosenthal put out, talking with Max Scherzer, and Max Scherzer's comments in the press conference after they traded David Robertson, who was their closer pretty much. Scherzer was pretty much like fuming, like, what's going on? You traded our closer. And he went and talked to the GM. He went and talked to Steve Cohen, and pretty much what they relayed to him was they're not going to like try to compete next year. It's going to be like a 2025, 2026. Like, they're not going to retool and go after it next year, which, interesting enough, probably takes them out of the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes in the free agency. But I thought it was really interesting to hear Scherzer just come out and talk about that, and just kind of air out their plans a little bit. Maybe it takes a little bit of leverage away from the Mets in terms of maybe some deals that they might try to do, but it's so interesting just to hear them after they trade for Lindor, they make all these deals, they get Scherzer, they get Verlander, they get Senga, they get all these guys, and it's just crashing and burning right away. I mean, if it's not going to work, don't force it. Kind of kudos to them for accepting that and just being like, listen, we got to retool. This isn't working. But at the same time, we love to see it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Rangers where Scherzer went. Playing amazing baseball. I think we all expected them to be better this year with their moves, but I don't think we expected this. Especially DeGrom's only pitched 6 games this season. He's got a 40% strikeout rate in 6 games and a 3.5% walk rate. That's just ridiculous. But they're doing all this without DeGrom. Nathan Eovaldi's been an absolute stud. He was an all-star. Andrew Heaney, John Gray have given him great starts here and there.
Yep.
Dane Dunning's been solid. And then they go out and get Max Scherzer. They traded for Aroldis Chapman a couple weeks ago. And the lineup's been the best in baseball. So what do you think about the Rangers? Tell me about them.
Yeah, they also acquired Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton, 2 pitchers from St. Louis. So like they were really going all out for the win. So their rotation deep. Also Martin Perez, they got another lefty they've had on the team. And you mentioned it. I think the lineup is deep and it's performing as expected now. They went out and they signed Simeon and Seager a couple of years ago to record contracts, and they're finally really starting to play well. Obviously, they have some of their younger guys playing a lot better now. Josh Young at third base was an all-star starter this year. He's played phenomenal. Adolis Garcia has been absolutely raking all year. And they're just getting contributions up and down the lineup. Jonah Heim was an all-star this year at the catcher position for them. Nathaniel Lowe at first base. Really, really solid bat in the middle of that lineup. And you're going to need to score to compete in the American League with Houston, in their division, nonetheless. Houston, Tampa Bay, Baltimore we'll get to in a second. Obviously, they're doing really, really well with their pitching. So I think that it's good to see them going for it. They realize that, listen, we're up there in the standings. I want to see they're leading the AL West right now. They're
half a game up.
Yeah, they're half a game up on the Houston right now. So they're fighting right there. Regardless, they're probably going to get at least a wild card spot, even if they don't end up winning the division. But listen, they're looking at Baltimore leading the American League right now. They're looking at, Texas, Minnesota, those 3 teams leading the division. You're looking at teams like the Yankees not having as great a year. Seattle's kind of not looking as good. Cleveland's not looking as good. Those were teams that we kind of expected to look better coming into this year. So they're seeing that this is their time. And I love that their GM is like, listen, let's go for it. They have the best run differential in the American League and right behind the Braves in the entire Major League Baseball. So they're really going for it. And I think it's great that they addressed their pitching as they did, and they didn't try to tinker with their lineup too much. Obviously, they bring in 2 starters, Max Scherzer, Jordan Montgomery, Chris Stratton, Aroldis Chapman, like we talked about. and beefed up both sides of the starting rotation and the bullpen. So honestly, I love what they're doing. I think that they should continue to compete for the American League West. I think Houston is obviously Houston. They're the defending World Series champions. They're getting Yordan Alvarez back. They're getting Jose Altuve back.
Justin
Obviously,
Verlander.
Justin Verlander. Obviously, they go out and trade for Justin Verlander. So they still have a lot of firepower themselves. So I think the race for the West is going to be just really, really fun to watch. And, kudos to them. They didn't give up too much. Obviously, the prospect they gave away for Scherzer and Luis Angel Acuna was, a steep price to pay. But at the same time, you're getting 2 years of Max Scherzer and, just to kind of beef up your rotation. Next year, they're going to have Scherzer and DeGrom, which what the Mets had last year. You can't really bank on their health, but I think they realize that they don't have DeGrom for this year. So they need that front of the line starter. With as good as they've been playing, they didn't really have that guy. Like before they made the Scherzer deal, who was probably going to start game one of a division series or a wild card matchup?
Eovaldi.
Yeah, Eovaldi. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so Eovaldi's pitched really, really well. But now you can slot him as your game two starter, Scherzer game one. Even though Scherzer's been struggling this year, his velo's dipped a little, spin rates have been down a little bit. I don't know if that has anything to do with him getting suspended for sticky stuff when they were kind of cracking down a little bit this year. But regardless, he's still a Hall of Famer. He's still Max Scherzer. So I love to see it. I think Texas is going to do really, really well. You think they hold on? Think these moves kind of keep them in the driver's seat of the West, or do you think it's just going to come down to the wire?
I think it's just going to come down to a wire. Both those teams are just really, really good right now. Houston's got the experience factor. So if I probably had to pick a team, I'd probably pick Houston to win the division. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if Texas wins it either.
Okay. Sticking in the American League, one of the major surprises has been the Baltimore Orioles, one of the teams we were in on this year in the preseason. They're sitting atop of the American League, and a lot of people peg Baltimore as a prime suitor for a starting pitcher. And it took right up until the deadline, but they got their guy. The Orioles acquired starting pitcher Jack Flaherty from the St. Louis Cardinals for 3 prospects. No big names, but the prospects currently slotting at 9, 23, and 26 on the Cardinals' new top 30 prospects. So it beefed up their system a little bit with some quantity, not necessarily quality, but the Orioles, it was a rental. It was for a rental in Jack Flaherty. Flaherty hasn't been quite himself of late. A couple years ago was one of the more dominant pitchers in the National League. But what do you think this does for the Orioles, Con? Do you think he kind of slots right in that potential game one starter for a playoff series for them?
I think that's kind of more of a wait and see how he pitches the rest of the season for them. I don't exactly know who, but I mean, they have some guys who have looked good at points this year. I mean, Tyler Wells has had a really, really good season for them. Even Kyle Bradish and Dean Kramer have shined in certain spots this year, a little bit more inconsistent than Wells. Flaherty obviously has shown the best stuff of any of them at any point in the majors. Yeah. So but like you said, he's kind of been a little bit not himself this year. So I could see him starting game one, but I think they're gonna see how it goes a little bit the rest of the regular season before they decide that.
Yeah, I mean, he's not getting as many strikeouts as he once did, but still limiting hard contact, 77% average exit velocity, 71st hard hit percentage, 77th percentile in barrel percentage. So doing a good job in limiting some hard damage, even though ERA sitting in the mid 4s, whip 1.5. You'd like to see that come down a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully he can stay around the zone. But honestly, I think it was a really, really good move for the O's. Obviously, Kyle Gibson, another arm who's been giving them a ton of innings. You'd like to see one more kind of established arm there, and they went out and got him. So I expect them to continue their good ways. I mean, their bullpen is what has gotten them to this point. Felix Bautista, I mean, they're talking about him, placing in the AL Cy Young discussion. As a reliever, it's very, very hard to do, and he is absolutely in contention for it. There's no doubt about it. They also have Cano, another setup guy, Yenyer Cano, I think his name is. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
sure
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
but he's been absolutely dominant. I think the Phillies, like last week, were the first time someone's gotten a hit that scored runs against them all year. So like you're talking about like dominant arms, and you mentioned Tyler Wells, a guy they just sent down to Double A. Like that was a little confusing. He's been pitching great for them, and I saw that they
Yeah.
sent him
I
down, and
didn't see that.
it was pretty. Yeah, they sent him down to Double A, and it was a little confusing. I think it may be an innings thing, maybe trying to limit some innings. See, I don't know if they said anything about it, but it was a little confusing there. But like you mentioned, a guy that's been pitching very, very well for them. So the fact that they have that depth, they also have Grayson Rodriguez, was once the number one prospect in baseball, number one pitching prospect in baseball. Hopefully he can realize some of his potential, and he's a front of the line rotation, if he hits his potential. So you're talking about another guy like that who could really help out. But Baltimore is continuing the driver's seat. Obviously, Tampa Bay is their number one competition for the American League East crown, and Toronto's kind of hanging around, but they're about 6-7 games back of the, maybe even more than that, of Baltimore. So it's going to be a 2-team race kind of there for Tampa Bay. There's kind of an upper echelon right now in the American League: Baltimore, Texas, Tampa Bay, and Houston. And then you kind of have teams like Toronto and Boston, LA, Angels kind of right on the outskirts of there. So we'll see how those races end up. But Baltimore needed a pitcher. They got a pitcher. And I did touch on one team just then. A major storyline that has dominated the baseball world all season has been Shohei Ohtani. A lot of talk about whether the Angels would trade him this year before he hits free agency in order to get some value back, in the event that the best player in baseball leaves their team. But not only did they decide to keep Ohtani, they went out and they made some moves. So let's talk about their moves they made, and if they're even a needle mover for UConn. So they acquired Lucas Giolito and Renato Lopez from the White Sox early, a couple days ago, for Edgar Cuero and Kai Bush. Edgar Cuero is now the White Sox number 2 overall prospect, and Bush comes in at number 7 for the White Sox. I believe they were number 1 and number 3 respectively in the Angels org when they moved to maybe 2 and 4, but they were pretty high prospects for Giolito and Lopez, who are both rentals. They're only going to be on the team for the last couple months of the season. And then on deadline day, they go out and they get first baseman CJ Cron and outfielder Randall Grichuk, both names that were connected to the Phillies. So I was kind of upset that both of them went to LA, but they moved pitcher Jake Madden and Mason Albright, 2 lower level prospects for Cron and Grichuk. So what do you think here, Con? Giolito, Lopez boofing up their pitching. They also get Cron and Grichuk to kind of beef up their lineup a little bit and their depth. Is it a needle mover for you? Do you think that this is going to allow them to get into, that wild card picture? They're 3 games back of Toronto right now. Does this move the needle for you?
Yeah, I want them to make the playoffs so bad. Giolito and Lopez are both nice pitchers. I like both of them. Giolito's having a solid year. He's been the definition of consistent this season. I like that pickup. I know it's just a rental. I do think they overpaid for those two, but I like both of those pitching pickups. Cron and Grichuk, you kind of know what you're going to get with them. There's going to be some swing and miss. They're going to hit some homers for you. They kind of needed another outfielder. I mean, obviously Trout's been out for a little bit now, which is he's irreplaceable. And then Taylor Ward just went down about a week ago or so.
Yep.
He's not going to be back until maybe the end of September. So like those are 2 big outfield bats that you're missing. Grichuk's not either of them. And
Yes.
and Cron he's what I said. He's going to rake against lefties, and he's going to have some hot streaks, and he's going to get cold for a little bit too. So the bats I just don't love. The problem with this is like the AL is just so tough. I mean, the 3 wild card teams are Tampa Bay, Houston, and Toronto, and they're 3 games back, which is not bad, but like all 3 of those teams are better. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's an uphill battle for the Angels.
And they have to jump Boston, who, surprisingly is doing very, very well this year, and they're expecting people back themselves. Chris Sale, Garrett Whitlock, Trevor Story, like high level players that are going to come back, and another name too that's escaping me. But they're expecting some people back who can bolster their run, and they're only a game and a half back. Obviously, LA is only 3 games back, but you know, the Yankees and Seattle are only 3.5 games back, so it's crowded. It is very crowded in
Exactly.
that wild card picture. Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's necessarily like needle moving for me, but I do like how they went out and they addressed a lot of needs because, like you said, Taylor Ward goes down, they go out and they get Grichuk. Obviously, he's not Taylor Ward, but he is an outfielder with some pop, a decent glove. I think they DFA'd Jared Walsh or they sent him down or whatever. So there was a need at first base. They get Crone. Obviously, their starting pitching has always been a question mark. Their bullpen, you can always use relievers. So I do kind of like, honestly, they need to win this year. So giving up all those prospects, at the end of the day, it's not really that big of a deal for me. So I do generally like the deals that they made, and I think that it'll help. Honestly, I'd rather them do this than just kind of go with their team and go through this kind of stretch run with hoping that Trout comes back healthy and stays healthy, and
They
hoping
need he's the key, obviously. Like if he comes back and he's good and he's hitting and the lineup starts to get hot, then they might make it. But
yeah,
they need
definitely.
Trout. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, so we'll touch on a couple other moves that affected a little bit of the landscape of the AL wild card. We touched on one earlier. Tampa Bay picked up Aaron Savale from the Guardians in Cleveland for first baseman Kyle Manzardo. You touched on it a little bit earlier in the show. Kyle Manzardo, a pretty high prospect, at least top 50, probably pushing now top 30 at least. With his bat, struggled a little bit in AAA, but I think a lot of people have kind of not really taken that super seriously. And you mentioned a guy in Aaron Savale, kind of a mid-rotation starter. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's got like he's got a 2.34 ERA this year. His expected ERA is almost a full run and a half higher. So, maybe he's pitching a little bit over his head. You touched on it. The seller's market kind of dictated that. Do you think this was a big overpay by the Rays here? Like an egregious overpay, or do you think it was kind of fair
I don't
practice?
think egregious, but it was a lot. Now the Rays do have some good hitting prospects still coming up in the minors, so I guess they're not too concerned about that. Yeah, and I'm always hesitant to say the Rays are like lost trade.
Right,
So
right.
who knows? Savali could get there and continue pitching to the 2-3-4, and Manzardo may not be as good as we all think he is. So I wouldn't say it's egregious by any means, but I think it definitely fed into the seller's market. Yeah, I think it was a lot.
Yeah. Another thing too, it's like these two teams, the Guardians and the Rays, it's like when the Guardians get rid of a pitcher, you're kind of like, eh. But when the
Yeah.
Rays acquire a pitcher, you're kind of like, okay, I like that.
Yeah.
And the same
Both of
thing.
them develop. I mean, yeah, the Rays just know how to get the best out of players, and then the Guardians are probably the best pitching development team in the MLB right now. So
Right.
yeah, it's
So it's really
it'll be
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
A little wrinkle there too is I believe they have Yandy Diaz under contract for at least like 2 or 3 more years. So maybe the Rays were kind of like, well, we kind of need Savale, and Manzardo's kind of blocked as it is. So, say what you will. Yandy, I'm pretty sure was an all-star this year, was a great call by you in the preseason. And, is playing great for them. So maybe you see that as kind of a neat thing. And a bat that Cleveland needed, by the way, a power bat who could potentially hit in the middle of that lineup. They ended up, I'll move to the next deal here kind of in tandem with that, but Cleveland traded away first baseman Josh Bell to the Miami Marlins for Gene Segura and shortstop Khalil Watson. So another really interesting deal here. But the move of Bell kind of opens up a path for Manzardo. So he might even get a cup of coffee this year, a couple appearances, but I think you can almost pencil him in as long as he performs in AAA as maybe their starting first baseman next year. So the fact that Cleveland was able to get that in dealing from an area of depth. I think was great practice all around. I think it's a win-win deal, honestly, for both teams. What do you make of the move of Josh Bell? Obviously, Khalil Watson, a toolsy prospect, but has kind of had off the field issues, kind of had some on the field issues too with his bat as well. And then they ended up DFAing Gene Segura right away. So what do you kind of make of that deal? Do you think this was strictly opening up a path for Manzardo, cutting payroll? What do you make of these deals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Marlins wanted another bat in Bell. I kind of like the get for them. He has not been great by any means this year, but he's just always kind of been a streaky hitter. He'll get hot for a few weeks and then he'll go ice cold for a month. But when he's hot, he can really hit the ball. He's got great hard hit percentage rates. He barrels the ball, great exit velocities. So he's definitely a very capable hitter when he's on. Watson, like you said, was really, really highly rated prospect coming in his first year, struggled a little bit, but he's still got a lot of talent. So I like that get for the Guardians. Yeah, I mean, they get Watson and Manzardo, and yeah, they lose Bell and Savale, but in all reality, the Guardians aren't doing anything this year. So I'm okay with it. Neither of Bell or Savale are incredible guys who the Guardians should have kept moving forward with their rebuild. So I'm good with it.
Right. And Cleveland only 2 games back of the division, even though they're 53 and 55, 2 games under 500, which just shows you how gross the AL Central is.
Horrible.
But yeah, a couple interesting moves there. Also, the Toronto Blue Jays had a little skip of their heart with Bo Bichette was rounding first base, put on the brakes, and kind of jammed his knee a little bit. They didn't say anything major structurally was any issue with Bo Bichette, so they're going to kind of play it by ear with that. But they go out and they get Paul DeYoung. They trade Matt Svanson. I don't really know Svanson too much about him, but Paul DeYoung kind of fell out of favor in St. Louis. So Toronto kind of realizing that they might have a hole there for a little bit, maybe didn't trust internal options. They go out and they're aggressive. They go out and they get Paul DeYoung, a player who's got pop, can play a decent shortstop. So I thought that was kind of an interesting move. We talked about them a little bit being in that third wild card spot right now, game and a half over the Red Sox. So I did want to mention that move just because of the swiftness they used after Bo Bichette got hurt. I thought that was an interesting thing there. And then
they had a little rapport going with the Cardinals. They also got Jordan Hicks when Jordan Romano went down. Jordan Hicks, young flamethrower from the Cardinals. So yeah, them and the Cardinals were talking a lot this deadline.
Yeah, and Jordan Hicks was a name that I kind of pegged for the Phils. I was hoping for maybe getting him too. So the fact that Toronto got him along with DeYoung, yep. So they should be pretty good there. Another deal that went down, not on deadline day, but before that, the Dodgers, currently sitting in first place of the NL West, go out and they get Lance Lynn and bring back Joe Kelly. Pretty big deal here. The White Sox traded a ton of starters. They traded a ton of people. We'll touch on them in a second as we kind of talk about this deal. But the Dodgers, man, they get Lance Lynn. I know you have Lance Lynn on your fantasy squad. So obviously the team a lot better that he's going to be pitching on, has kind of struggled. You would know obviously better than me the day-to-days. What do you think about this move for the Dodgers? They before you do touch on that, I did want to preface it with they did acquire Eduardo Rodriguez only for
I was going to bring that up.
Yep. Only for him to waive his or execute his no trade clause. So they end up going, they get Ryan Yarbrough too. So touch on all those pitching moves for the Dodgers, and do you think that A, it was needed, and B, it's going to move the needle for them?
Yeah. I've always been a Lance Lynn guy. He's like top in the AL in strikeouts, but a week ago he topped like 10 or something. But a week ago he was leading the entire league in ERA, like a highest ERA. So he's been an anomaly kind of this year. He had like an 18 strikeout game, I think.
Yeah.
I love the move to LA. He actually started last night for them, pitched 7 against Oakland. Even does that really count? I don't know, but struck out like 7 or 8, pitched 7 innings, quality start against Oakland in his first start. I would not be surprised to see him turn in a 3.5 ERA with LA the rest of the season. I think that's a good get for them. Joe Kelly, obviously a piece you can add to the bullpen, throws hard, got some good stuff. And then Yarbrough, he's a guy who can eat innings, and he's such a different pitcher. He's just going to give guys such a different look. He's throwing so much slower than all the guys are today, focused on movement, focused on control. He's not going to light the world on fire, but he can eat some innings for you. So, yeah, I like the moves for the Dodgers. I would have liked Eduardo Rodriguez there a lot more. But
Yeah.
yeah,
We all
think,
kind of expected him to get moved too.
yeah,
This
we
deadline.
did. Apparently he wanted to stay on the East Coast because it's closer to his family or something, and he didn't want to go out to LA.
Yeah, I get that.
Not that Detroit's the East Coast by any means.
Right, Midwest, kind of a little confusing.
Yeah.
Pretty north. But regardless, that's what he wanted to do. It was on his, I think he had 10 teams on his no trade modified list. So, good for him. He ended up staying where he wanted to be. They ended up trading Nick Nastrini, Jordan Leisure, and Trace Thompson, brother of future Hall of Famer Klay Thompson. But good get for LA. I think it, bolsters them enough, while at the same time leaving them some flexibility this offseason, potentially to chase Shohei Ohtani if he does, in fact, leave Anaheim. So other than that, there was we could just touch on a couple other moves as we wrap up. A couple relievers. Actually, the one deal with the White Sox I didn't want to talk about, they traded Jake Burger to the Marlins. So the Marlins got Josh Bell and Jake Burger. They also got David Robinson. So they were some pretty big buyers at the deadline. They traded Jake Eder. The Marlins did, back to Chicago White Sox.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. So Jake Burger to the Marlins for Jake Eder. Eder, a left-handed pitcher for them. Pretty high in their ranks too. So, and the Marlins have a ton of depth in their pitching. So the fact that they went and were comfortable moving him for a guy in Jake Burger, who's hitting about a buck 220 right now, but has 25 dingers, could give them some pop. An interesting move there. A couple other relievers. Andrew Chafin went to Milwaukee from Arizona, bolstered their bullpen a little bit. Paul Sewald went to Arizona, so they kind of replaced Chafin with arguably maybe a better reliever. Sewald has done really, really well in Seattle. So, it's a good get for Arizona. One of the bigger names on the market was Jeimer Candelario too. And he went to Chicago, signed or got traded to the Cubs. So kind of an interesting move there. The Cubs have been absolutely red hot of late to kind of get back into the wild card race. So maybe they thought they needed a guy in Jeimer Candelario. They DFA Trey Mancini in the corresponding move. So kind of an interesting deal there. But yeah, just a number of other deals. Kendall Graveman, another White Sox pitcher, got shipped to the Astros. So the Astros also beefed up their bullpen along with Justin Verlander in their rotation. And yeah, just a number of other little moves here. Nothing. I mean, Atlanta, they get Brad Hand, former Phil Brad Hand, completes his trip around the NL East with Atlanta. That's not a huge needle mover for me for them. The Braves were kind of quiet, honestly, Con. They get Nicky Lopez from the Royals, and then they get Brad Hand, but kind of
I don't think they need to do anything.
I guess as I was saying that, I was kind of thinking, I guess they're doing all right, but overall, nothing else too crazy jumping out to me. I don't know if there was anything that you had.
Just two quick ones, nothing
Yeah.
crazy. Boston got Luis Urias, who's a versatile infielder from Milwaukee. So I think he's been hurt for a little bit, but
he's just getting ready to be back.
Yeah, he should be back soon. That could be a solid get for them. He can hit the ball when he's hot. And then I can't believe it. The Yankees acquired Spencer Howard from the Texas Rangers. Yeah, cash considerations. No players back to Texas.
A rousing trade deadline for the New York Yankees. Kenyon Middleton and Spencer Howard.
Wow. Yeah.
Former top prospect Spencer Howard. Let's not forget that.
Yep.
But yeah, honestly, overall reaction to the deadline, kind of underwhelming in terms of everyone kind of pegged the names that would be dealt. Verlander, Scherzer was kind of a little bit of a shock, but Verlander was kind of being pegged to leave. Lorenzen, obviously, to the Phillies was a name that was getting a lot of traction. Flaherty was a name that was getting a lot of traction. Maybe the biggest shock outside of the Scherzer one was the Savale to the Rays for Kyle Manzardo, like we talked about. That one was a little bit shocking. But honestly, pretty quiet. I sent Connor a picture of our rundown from the trade deadline 2 years ago, which was absolutely ridiculous. All 30 teams made a deal. There was all stars. It was ridiculous. So it didn't rival that, but still some big names that got moved. Overall, I think teams got better. I think sellers, got more than they deserved for the players that they moved. So I think it was a good deadline. And we look forward to the back half of the season. I know I'm really excited for these wild card races. They're super tight. There's a lot of teams contending with the expanded playoffs. Obviously, last year there's going to be a ton of teams in it, and you can tell by the amount of buyers that there were in the market. So if that's all with the deals that we'll talk about there, that is going to wrap it up for the show today. Once again, check the description or check the description for our handles to social media below. Connor, appreciate you hopping on again. We'll have you on much more as the football season comes around and as baseball heats up. Feel free to shoot us any questions again, guys. Instagram, Twitter, or X, whatever. Anything, we'll answer it live on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again next time. Book it.
Mm-hmm.